and we were impressed with a small company called Information Access Company. And they said they could do it. They would do what we wanted, make it a microfilm edition and also hard copy. And we decided to go ahead with them. Some of the members of the executive board were against it. And I had a real hard time getting the executive board to approve it. They finally did, and that was now what is now the Legal Resources Index and the current one, and which does a good job. I think that was probably the most useful thing I ever did. One of the members of the executive board was convinced that I was being paid off by this company. So I told the president of the company once, I said, Dorothy's convinced that he pay me off, so he might as well pay me off. he wouldn't do it. But that was it was a lot of fun being president of the AALL, and I was there just at a real turning point in the association. We only had there was a Chicago headquarters, but they only had one person there, Babe, can't think of her last name. It was just about that point that they decided to go ahead and hire a full-time executive director, and of course this was all the growth. It took place at, fortunately for me, the annual convention took place in San Francisco at the Fairmont Hotel. And I still remember the shock I gave to the West Publishing Company representative who always sponsored the opening banquet when I told him what it was going to cost them at the Fairmont. But it was, and also I may add that Tom Reynolds from Boat Hall was my program chairman, was local chairman, I mean. And Tom loves wine and he loves food, and it was probably one of the best banquets that AALL ever had.
Now, AALL recognized you afterwards.
Well, they started just a year before I retired to give a recognition at the final convention to a retiring law librarian. My two immediate predecessors was Marion Gallagher of University of Washington and Julius Mark of NYU. Next year they recognized me and Art Charpentier from Yale. And there's still a little thing in my office if you want to see it.
Was it through AALL that you met Roy Mirsky, your co-author?
No. There's an interesting story where I met Roy. I was assistant librarian at Columbia, and he was assistant librarian at Yale. And there was a local chapter of the AALL that used to meet every couple months in New York. He would come in, and we met there, and then we started talking, and we'd commiserate on the terrible life of being assistant law librarians, and became friends there. And then we had a lot of interest in common. It was at that point that I realized that all of a sudden in the law library we were getting an awful lot of non-legal periodicals. And mentioned to Roy, and the same thing at Yale. And this, of course, was the change in legal education when a lot of the younger faculty were now becoming interdisciplinary. And they were interested in economics and psychology and sociology and so forth. So I came up with the idea of doing an index of those journals that came into the Yale Library and the Columbia Library that were not indexed, the index of legal periodicals. So for the first few years, it only included those journals that were at Yale or Columbia. And it was called, it's indexed of periodical articles related to law, edited by Roy Mirsky and Jacobstein. Mirsky's name was first because Yale had more titles than Columbia did. Again, coincidentally, we both left Yale and Columbia at the same time. I had to go out to Colorado, and Roy became law librarian at the Supreme Court of the state of Washington, in Olympia, Washington. Well, a lot of our colleagues told us, well, yeah, you could do this index when at Yale and Columbia, but we're out in the boondocks. What are you going to do? Well, Roy and I decided we would continue, and we did, and of course then it changed from being the index of those journals at Yale and Columbia to articles related to law throughout the world in English, which was a little bit of an exaggeration, but it sounded good, and we did cover an awful lot. And that's been going on ever since. I no longer have connected with it, but there was a 30-year accumulation and 5-year. And that's one thing I think that Roy and I have never gotten full credit for. I think it's a great thing, and it's still going on. It was a lot of fun to do, and we didn't make very much money on it neither. But Roy, we had similar interests, and we also had opposite personalities. We were really the kind of the art couple. We used to go to the ALLS, that is Association of American Law Schools, annual meetings, which was always in the wintertime. And in those days, usually in Chicago. And inevitably, it would be 10 below zero during that week that the AALS met there. And of course, neither Yale or Columbia would pay for our going there. We had to pay ourselves. We didn't have much money. And so we always shared a room. And we were really like the art couple there. Roy was a neat freak. And as my wife will gladly tell you, and I'm a slob. And he was also a fresh air freak. And so here it was, 10 below zero outside. He'd open the window during the night, and I had to get up and close it. To this day, I kind of hate myself for it, but I would purposely leave my dirty socks around as I know it would irritate him. We were both so thankful when we finally got to the point that we could afford our own rooms. But one reason our collaboration over the years continued for so long, and still continued, that we didn't match each other in very good ways. Roy may disagree with this. I was primarily the idea man, and he was the production man, although not in all cases, but certainly in the fundamentals of legal research, it was really my idea. And what happened there was that shortly after I got here, and the dean called me in. There was nothing said about this in my interview, but he called me in and asked me if I would teach legal bibliography to the students. So I and our former reference librarian, George Tarze Bieber, would each take half the first-year class. There wasn't any decent tools. And so I was kind of preparing my own materials, and there's a mimeograph copy floating around here someplace. And when the president of Foundation Press got in touch with me that the author of the Fundamentals of Legal Research, Irvin Parlock, Ohio State, had dropped dead. And he said he's halfway through the new edition. Would you take over? Well, I said I would if Roy could come in to help me, and did. And then it turned out that Pollock told him that he was halfway through. He hadn't done a thing. And also at that time, Roy took off for a year to teach at Hebrew University in Israel. And so I was pretty much left doing the first Jacobstein Mercy edition of the Fundamentals. It was successful, though, and I have to give Roy full credit because he has the ability of editing things, and he has a big staff at Texas, and he has research assistants, and so he took care of all the detail work, and he would give ideas too. So since then we collaborated on a lot of ideas. I came up with the idea that someone ought to bring together all the hearings on the nominations of the Supreme Court justices, which we did, but it was really Roy who did all the work on that. We really collaborated equally on the index of periodicals related to law. He certainly did his share on the fundamentals, although it was my idea to do the legal research Illustrated, which it turns out was the most successful of the two editions financially. He's a very, very interesting person, a very different personality in mine, but somehow we've always were able to communicate with each other and had similar ideas of what a library is supposed to be doing.
Do you have a favorite story of interacting with Roy Mirsky?
Well, other than leaving my dirty socks around. No. Well, yes, I do have one. He, incidentally, again, this coincidentally, when I left Colorado to come here, he took over the law librarian position at Colorado. And I really cleaned out my office, and I thought I did. And I left, unknown, I left one reprint of an article he'd sent me, reprint of his article. And the first piece of mail I get from him was this article. It's a little note saying, "Haven't you forgotten something?" So I sent it back to him with a little note saying, "I've been trying to." And we went on. I mean, at times our secretaries were really surprised at the letters we'd send back and forth. But, oh no, that was, I really wish I was more of an author, because you could write a fascinating book on his stories.
Another book you were involved with was Jerry Gunther's Learned Hand.
Well, I wasn't really involved with that. Jerry was appointed to do the Learned Hand biography, and the papers were at Harvard. And so he took the thing with the understanding that Harvard would lend the papers to Columbia, to Stanford. And they came here, and we had them upstairs. I don't know that room on the third floor. It was kind of a machine room or something. It was all kept in there in files. And then we had the big flood. You probably might have heard about the big flood here. You weren't here then, were you? One evening, about 10 o'clock, the phone rings. And there's Dean Myers, and says, "You better get over here." It seems that above, in the top of the building here, what would be the attic, I guess, there, they had water pipes. Somehow one of them broke, or more broke, and water came down through the third floor and the second floor, just soaking all the books. And it happened that Bell and I were out that night, didn't get home about 10 o'clock, and so when I got here, the dean was here, and he had gotten some students together, and they were taking all the books off the shelves. I finally got in contact with the person at the main at Green Library, who was the restoration expert, and told us what to do, and we packed all the books up and trucked them over to Lockheed, where they put them in a big vacuum room, and that sunk, pulled all the water out of the books, and then dried them. And we must have taken a couple thousand volumes over there, and I think we only were 2 volumes that we had to replace. But the Packard papers, or the Learned Hand papers, were pretty well soaked. And we took those over there too, because Gunther was really upset about it, but fortunately, again, that worked. And Gunther told me it was only 1 or 2 papers he lost. I hope, Paul, that the library's now prepared for any similar instance, that you got the staff ready to cover up the bookshelves and so forth.
It was flooded on Erica's office.
Okay. Yeah.
The Stanford Law Library is about to reach 500,000 volumes, and there's going to be a ceremony for that particular volume. What type of benchmarks did you usher in while you were here?
Well, the 100,000 one, believe it or not. And Howard Sugarman, who was the acquisitions librarian at the time, as we saw we were approaching that, trying to think what would be the ideal value they always see of the librarian giving the book to the dean, and this is 100,000 volume. But that time, there was a commission president that set up a commission on obscenity, and then some publisher came out with an illustrated edition of this. And so I told Howard, that'd be a great idea to make that the illustrated edition of the Commission on Subsidy. It's the 100,000 volume. Well, he was kind of straight-laced, and he wouldn't agree with that. So we finally found, Howard finally found a book that was called Stanford on criminal law. Something was an 18th century English book. So we got that. That was the 100,000 volume. And the 500,000 now, that's interesting because I really planned the library to hold 500,000 volumes.
It's getting full.
What are some other things that you're really proud of that?
Oh, I guess I'm mostly proud of the new building and with the input I had in that. And to this day, I shudder to think what this building would look like if I wasn't there fighting every inch of the way. The faculty, only really, they all know they want a library, they need a library. They had no concept of what a library does, and they're only all interested in getting what they wanted. And so that, and also I guess what I look back, I'm really pleased with the fact of the staff development that I was able to provide. If I can remember them all on the staff who, Rosie Long got her law degree while she was working here. Harriet Wu got her library degree. Joan Harlan got her library degree and her law degree here. Iris Weilman, did I mention her? Iris Weilman got her law degree while she was working here. And there might be another one or two around there. Also, I think I ought to go on record here that I was really fortunate when I came here that my predecessor, John Merriman, had a pretty good staff here, a very good staff here. With George Stars A. Bieber was the reference librarian, very interesting person, and a very intelligent person. He was a Hungarian who had to leave Hungary during the war, but very well educated. His father had been on the Hungarian Supreme Court. He knew all languages and very much interested in Roman law. And was a very good reference librarian. Then there's Howard Sugarman, who was the acquisitions librarian. And of course, we spent a lot of time acquiring books for this library. And then Rosalie Long was a head cataloger, who, then when we moved into the new building, and both Howard and George retired about then, I made Rosalie the associate law librarian. And awful lot of credit really goes to them, too, for what went on in this building, especially in the planning of this building. Rosalie was the one really responsible for moving the building, and she could probably tell you stories that were what she went through and that.
Well, I think you certainly set the tone for the staff here.
Well,
It was a wonderful example. Is it a wrap? I don't know. Okay. And we're off.
can we come back on if necessary?
Sure.
Just let me run through. Yeah, let me run through my notes here.
Want some water?
Yeah.
Been talking.
Just run. Oh, okay.
Almost. There we go. Okay.
I think I covered everything I
Oh,
wanted.
it was great. You're
You
like,
seem to have a nice flow, too.
yeah, you're doing everything just couldn't have been planned better. So.
That's why this, it just seemed like it was kind of out of the...
Yeah, no,
That's
yeah,
why it turned,
yeah.
it just seemed like it was...
Did I cover everything?
Oh yeah, gosh, yeah, everything and beautifully.
Let's see.